Hello there, Clayton Luce coming to you live from SCEI-1BLOOD.me. This video is just going to be a brief prologue, prelogue, overture, if you will, of the cult SCEI-1BLOOD International. That is the Sovereign Church of Elohim International, operated under Kenneth D. Jackson Sr. and his son Smoke Jackson, and all of the others that operate beneath them. Sovereign Church of Elohim International is a cult. It fits all of the basic definitions. It's a mind control cult where they use fear and isolation in order to control their members. The cult is run and founded by Dr. Kenneth D. Jackson Sr., who is not a doctor. He never went to law school, medical school, or school at all. No college. All that we can probably say with any degree of certainty is that he might have graduated high school. We don't even know that. We put in inquiries to the University of Maryland, the only accredited school which he listed on his CV. And they wrote back saying that they had never heard of the man. So we know that he is unaccredited. He is not a doctor. Yet he goes by the title. He practices medicine. He now runs hospitals in West Africa, where he does surgeries, invasive surgeries. My own mother was a victim of Dr. Kenneth D. Jackson. She died under his care. And there were many others. So let's talk a little bit about the man. I joined the cult in 2007, maybe late 2006. My father brought me into it, Robert Luce. He had been there since, I would say, 2003, and got me involved in the cult. My first introduction to Dr. Kenneth Jackson as an adult came at that time. I had known him, of course, during the late 90s when my mother was dying of cancer, and he subsequently aided in the process of her death. And he told me all sorts of stories. He was a covert CIA operative throughout the 70s, that he was the special attorney to the Santa G. Romana estate, the secret black ops fund of the world, if you will, the Nazi gold, that he was very familiar with the 13 Illuminati families, that he was the apostle of God, etc., etc. The list really goes on. No matter what you bring up to the man, he will know all about it, and he will have been involved in some way. After joining the cult, I spent a lot of time behind the scenes. I started, now when I first got there, the sermons, if you will call them sermons, were tape recordings. Now these tape recordings were virtually unintelligible. You could not understand anything that was being said. I don't know whether they were recorded on a outdated cassette recorder or what, but you would basically sit there for about 3 or 4 hours every Saturday, and you would listen to this unintelligible garbage. Now at the time, I would say that the sermons, if you would call them that, were valid in the most basic sense of the word. They were basically Bible studies. Now these were recorded years before I ever got there. Apparently there had been a lot of changes in Dr. Jackson between the time that I arrived and the time that those recordings had been made. But they were basically Bible studies, really intensive breakdowns of the Gospels and the law of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Now, what the cult practices and teaches is a form of Mosaic law, very strict adherence to the laws of Moses, i.e., the food laws: no pork, no shrimp or crustaceans. But it got a little bit more extreme than that as I was there longer. Because he would talk about things like the death penalty, things that you could die for. Hold on just a sec. Obviously, smoking pipes was not within the repertoire of SCEI-1BLOOD staff. Unless you were high enough up, then you could do whatever you wanted. But yeah, they taught a form of Mosaic law, which is very standard in your cults, Bible-based cults of today. Now, AP, as we call him, this is Kenneth D. Jackson Sr. We called him AP, short for Apostle. He was in charge of the whole organization. SCEI-1BLOOD was basically several organizations all mixed together. SCEI is the Sovereign Church of Elohim International. 1BLOOD is the diplomatic outreach, if you will. They were never diplomatic, and they were never authorized or acknowledged by anyone else in an official capacity. But they were also Six Keys Health Ministries, which was, I think, where Kenneth Jackson got started. This was a homeopathic alternative medicine group that he had, where he basically took in all these people with terminal diseases and gave them all sorts of herbs and medicines and concoctions. And through that, he started recruiting people into his church, which was held on the Saturdays on the Judaic Sabbath. They would have meetings and whatnot, and through time, these things devolved from basic Bible studies into these fear-mongering messages that they are today. Now, from what I understand, and I wasn't there early in the cult, it was around 2001 to 2003, roughly, that he first went to West Africa, Sierra Leone. Sorry, my pipe was poorly lit. Now, from eyewitness accounts that were there at the time and have since come out of the cult, Kenneth Jackson came back from those early missions as a different man. It was about that time that he started wearing crowns on his head. He started referring to himself as some sort of a king. The whole apostle thing got far more serious. And over time, things just went more and more downhill. He started playing all these tapes. Now, when I got to the cult, it was nothing but tapes. You rarely saw Kenneth Jackson Sr. And as I said before, they were basically Bible studies. Now, this was in 2007, early 2007. Now, as the years progressed, as I was there, they started introducing all of these protocols as far as how to act, how to speak, what you could and could not say, what you could and could not reveal outside of the cult itself. For example, Anytime that Kenneth Jackson or Smoke Jackson were to walk into the room, everyone had to stand up and clap. Their doors had to be opened for them. They had to be chauffeured. They stayed in the finest hotels. They were basically royalty. He came back with this idea that he was some sort of a hereditary king of West Africa based on some sort of slave heredity that he had based back to the 1700s, where some king from West Africa had been enslaved and sent here, and he's basically the direct descendant of that king. Now, no evidence was ever provided for any of this, and no evidence exists because it's all utter bullshit. But he's very convincing, and the cult believes it. So he's treated now as a king. He wears a crown that has the letter K embroidered on it for king, and his son, Smoke Jackson, who is a thug, nothing more, very mindless, very, very, very low IQ. And he wears his little crown that says P for Prince. Now, as Kenneth Sr. Became more involved in the West African scene, where they carried him around like some sort of a king, and they all danced and cheered every time he landed on the ground. They carried him over their heads, gave him gifts. And as this went to his head, his son basically took over as pastor at Miracle Manor, which is located at 5 Joyce Drive, Segota Road, off of Segota Road in Macon, Georgia. This is like a cult compound. They have fenced it in. It was basically a junkyard. They live in triple wide trailers that are all joined together. I mean, it's a really, really, really pathetic thing to see. I mean, these guys are bottom of the bottom. But they believe that they are the top of the top, and they have somehow convinced all of their members that they are also the top of the top, even as they steal all their money, spend it all on frivolous things, and live like, I wouldn't call it kings. I've lived better than they ever will in my lowest times. But they have learned the art of mind control, using fear and using isolation in order to control the masses. It's nothing new. You might be surprised that people like Kenneth Jackson and Smoke Jackson would ever be able to employ it effectively, but they have. They're an exception to the rule. Now, Kenneth Sr. claims that this Miracle Manor, which is what they call this trailer park, is in fact a international embassy, that it is protected under international law, and that it is in fact an extension of God's kingdom on earth, and that it is an embassy recognized internationally as an embassy of God Almighty, who they call Elohim. In other words, law enforcement cannot penetrate it. They cannot come on. They cannot go off. It has no ties to the U.S. government. It is not under their authority. It exists within Twiggs County, Georgia, as a purely sovereign and independent state. Now, this is utter bullcrap. I have talked to the Twiggs County sheriffs or deputies. I have done my own research, and no one acknowledges Miracle Manor as any sort of embassy, not because it is and they don't, but because it's not. It simply is not. It's a trailer park. It's a trailer park run by a bunch of cultists, and it will never be anything more. Now, what Kenneth Jackson has done is he's gone to West Africa. Now, he uses the videos that he sends back as some sort of evidence that he is this king, that he is the savior of West Africa, and to justify whatever else happens to float off the top of his brain at any given time. Because they all dance around, they have these big parades, celebrations, they carry him around. Now, I challenge you to go to YouTube and do some YouTube searches. Look at Ashton Kutcher, or I don't know, whoever goes to West Africa or South Africa or Middle Africa or wherever in Africa with money, and they are all treated exactly the same, whether they're kings or not, whether they're anybody or nobody. They all get danced around, they all get carried around, they all get gifts. What he uses to proclaim himself as a king and as an apostle and an end-time prophet is shared with every other person that's ever gone to West Africa with a little bit of money in their pocket. Nothing special. He is nobody. He always will be nobody. That's why he uses us. Within his cult, he has collected a few higher classed individuals, those that he aspires to be, or to be like, or to take from. And I guess he borrows some of their prestige in order to justify himself. But do not be fooled. He's got 40 people in his cult. When I arrived there in 2007, he had 40 people in his cult. It's nothing. 1BLOOD International is nothing. Now, he's made it into this big thing by using my father's money, by stealing, essentially, through subversive tactics of lying, saying that he is one thing when he's another, by trying to twist his way into people's minds to get them to give him what they have. And through that, he's got a few dollars over there that he's put to good use for himself. No one else experiences any benefits from it, but he does. In fact, from what I understand, he now has a second family over there with the same children by the same name. Now he has 2 Kyokas. He has a daughter here named Kyoka, and now he has a daughter in Africa named Kyoka. A sicko. A real, true, bona fide sicko. All of these claims that he's made, I've gone through, and I went through with the best of intentions originally, thinking that I was doing him a favor by going through his CV or his portfolio, all of his education, his affiliations, and all the organizations he's a part of, etc. I went through all of that, and I found that 95.5% were fictitious. They don't even exist. He made them up. His education, he made it up. Dr. Kenneth D. Jackson? No such thing. There's a Kenneth Jackson, but there's no Dr. Kenneth Jackson, because he's a liar. And he's a fraud, and he's a con artist. And as much as I love the man, and when I say I love him, I was a victim of him, personally. I accepted him as a father, as my best friend, as my guide, as my counselor, as the voice of God himself. And I guess through so many years of that, I developed true love for him. He's almost like a father. But he's like the father that tried to kill me. You know, I love you now, but this is what it is, and you have to be dealt with. Now let's get more into the doctrine of the doctor. What Kenneth Jackson teaches is a form of Old Testament law mixed with New Testament pseudo-prophecies, neo-prophecies, where he claims to be an end-time prophet. It's based off of his idol, Herbert W. Armstrong, who was the leader of the Worldwide Church of God, which was a mega cult. The Worldwide Church of God was located, or based, or headquartered out of Pasadena, California. And it taught the same thing, basically, that he teaches. But it was very much a white supremacist type of group. It was very, very white. It was not very accepting of other cultures. And it reached out to European nations and European cultures. And Dr. Jackson, or Kenneth Jackson, I'll no longer refer to him as Doctor, sees himself as this bridge of the gap between Herbert's ministry as an apostle and his own. Whereas Herbert reached out to the white world, he now reaches out to the black world. They teach the same things. Kenneth claims to be superior or more knowing, but they teach the same thing. A number of his current cult members are, in fact, Worldwide Church of God remnants. The church broke up back in '96, somewhere around there, and split into a bunch of different branches, all of the different churches of God that we have today. And what Kenneth Jackson has essentially done, and it's a fraud, but what he has done is he has claimed title to Herbert Armstrong's succession. How he has done this, and he did it during what we called prophecy workshops, which were weekend-long sermons, basically, where AP would sit up there and talk all sorts of nonsense. But how he did it was based on the church seal. The Worldwide Church of God had a seal, or a logo, if you will, of a sheep with a boy in front of it. It's well known. Google it if you want to know. Google Worldwide Church of God seal, and you'll probably see it. But it was a wooden seal. Now, what he did was he claimed that there were 3 seals made originally under the administration of Herbert W. Armstrong. Now, one was given to him. One was given to Joseph Tkach, the successor of Herbert Armstrong. And I guess the other one just kind of disappeared. Now, the way he described it was that the seals were some sort of a message from God, or a delegation by God of who his next apostles would be. Joseph Tkach took one of the seals, and he had it for a while. And then he died, I think, in 10 years, which AP claimed that he had prophesied because of his apostasy. And that this third seal was in his hands. And that it was a divine revelation that he was to become the successor, the next apostle in this succession of apostles, all the way back to the original 12. And that because he had received this seal from this mega cult, which literally took in hundreds of $1,000,000 a year, it was a huge cult back in the 80s. Magnificent in its scope. And he claimed basically that he had received this last seal, and that it was essentially the proof that he was who he said he was. Now, at the time, I had made my headquarters for my office. I was the multimedia guy there. I had set up shop in his old office where he used to do his Six Keys Health Ministries. And on the wall in my office, there was the seal that he later used. I have pictures of it, photographs of it that I took just because I was an avid photographer at the time. I took a lot of pictures of everything on site. And the seal was one of the subjects of my photographs. And it was hanging right above my desk. Now that's no news. But what is news is that there is a fourth seal that no one knows about. The fourth seal was in my file cabinet. And it was buried. It was inside of a little cardboard box. And I don't know how long it had been there before I found it. You know, I was going through some stuff. I found it. And I opened the box. And there was this carving. It was a seal of the Worldwide Church of God. The difference was it was half complete. It was a partial carving, a forgery. It was exactly the same as the seal that was on the wall, except it was incomplete. Now, what does this mean exactly? Well, to me, knowing Kenneth Jackson as I do now, was that the man commissioned a certain number of seals. I don't know whether those two were the only ones, or whether there are more that are out there that are floating around that he has reserved. I do not know. What I do know is that in my office at that time there was 1.5 seals. One complete, one incomplete. The complete one was taken out of my office on the week of the prophecy workshop where he used the seal to proclaim himself as the next apostle of God. But they did not take the half-completed seal, and I held on to it for quite some time. He used that seal in his sermon after some great to-do about all of the history of the church from Sardis to present or whatever it was. He then presented this seal to the cult and said that this was the seal passed down from Herbert Armstrong and the Worldwide Church of God. And that it was revelation of his position. Well, now for me, personally, knowing that there was another seal that was incomplete, this provided a sort of a conflict in my soul, if you will. But needless to say, at the time I was brainwashed into the cult, so I took everything at face value, even though mentally there was a conflict. But I took it for what it was. You know, I let it go. But I held on to the seal for a while, and I studied it. It was exactly the same, made from the same wood, the same tone, the same color, the same beads. It was just incomplete. The lion had only been half carved out. The face had only been half done. The borders were mostly complete, but they were not entirely complete. All of the jewelry had not been added to it. So some weeks or months later, I don't know why exactly, but I took the seal and I presented it to Kenneth Jackson's wife, Joanne Jackson. And I said, this is something I have in my office. I don't know how it fits into the big picture, but I'm presenting it to you to do with as you will. She quickly took it from me, implied that it was to remain secret, and I never saw it again. I have no idea what became of it. I did not take photographs of it, unfortunately. But I know. I'm not big into evidence when it comes to that sort of thing, because in reality, we all live within our own realities. So my reality exists with two seals, not one. I tell you the story now so that you can make your own deductions. So what became of that seal, I do not know. What I do know is that from that time forward, the ministry began to change. Things started to progress much more rapidly. Kenneth Jackson lived essentially overseas in West Africa. He would be here maybe 2 to 3 months of the year. The rest of the time he was in West Africa. His son, the buffoon, Smoke Jackson, ran the cult. Now, from many conversations that I've had with numerous cult members that were there early in the years, this man, Smoke, his son, was some sort of a gangster thug, motorcycle gang member, had all sorts of nefarious dealings, went clubbing all the time, just an all-around shitwad, if you will. Excuse the language. And at the time that Kenneth Jackson proclaimed that Smoke would be his successor and the new pastor of the church, there was a great ordeal. Many people were very distraught because at that time, many people had spent time with this boy, Smoke Jackson, and had known him as a thug, as a petty street gangster. And there was serious controversy over the fact that, okay, so this thug, this partier, clubber, was all of a sudden the pastor of God's true church on the earth. And there was a falling out at that time. Now, I don't know all the details. I was not there. I know a lot of people left. Now, since I was there, I spent a great deal of time with Smoke Jackson. In fact, because AP was gone all of the time, Smoke was my voice of God. He was the face of the church, as far as I knew it, until AP was on the ground. So I spent a lot of time with Smoke, and I wiggled my way into his inner circle. I was high in the organization at the time. Let me tell you a few things about old Smoke. For one, he was a vicious alcoholic. He always drank, and he was drunk. He would claim to me, there were a few times we went deer hunting, or had little special campouts or whatever, and he would explain to me how he could drink a bottle of whiskey and not get drunk because he was just immune to alcohol. Now, folks, let me tell you something. No one is immune to alcohol. You might have a high tolerance because you're an alcoholic, but you're not immune to it. And the man was drunk many times when he was preaching, teaching, and prophesying. to the extent that you could not understand the words that were coming out of his mouth. He would blur sentences together. He would speak in reverse. He would sit there and go through these rants about how the congregation saw him as a drunk and how offended he was at the prospect. And in the midst of these rants and raves, he would be so drunk that he couldn't even speak. I'm not drunk. I never did that. These people just think I'm drunk, and I can drink 20 bottles of whiskey and I never get drunk in my life. Folks, let me tell you something. Smoke Jackson, the pastor, now the bishop of the Sovereign Church of Elohim International, is a dedicated alcoholic. I won't go into all the other things he is right now, because there are investigations underway, and I would prefer to wait my turn. But that is a fact that I can reveal now. Let me tell you one thing he told us, and mind you, this is a bit graphic, but this is the type of thing that he would have serious conversations with his disciples about. Now, he considered himself to be some sort of a Jesus figure, and all of those around him, which at the time were myself, a fellow by the name of Patrick Gish, Kenneth Christmas III, Andre Fuentes, and Lamont Johnson, and a few others that were within his inner circle of drunks, where he would sit down and have these Bible studies, if you will. They weren't really Bible studies, they were just rambling nonsense. But one time we were having this session, if you will, and Smoke was going over the importance of, or over the topic of masturbation. And here's what he said. I'm going to try to get as accurate as I can without paraphrasing, but there will be some paraphrasing. A man should not ejaculate or spill his seed onto the earth, because you might jack off and it might spill onto the countertop or onto the table. And then a female might come by, having known your deeds, and rub it into her vagina and get pregnant and create a baby. Let me say that again. The reason you, according to Scripture, should not ejaculate outside of your wife, according to the doctrine of Sovereign Church of Elohim, is because you might skeet, if you will, onto the counter or table. A female might come by, having known your deed, scoop it up, place it into her vagina, and create a baby, according to the Bible. I'm not making this shit up, folks. And there were people that were sitting there, myself included, that were listening in rapture, in absolute faith, that not only was this man speaking to us, but that he was the voice of God Most High, the creator of heaven and earth, speaking to us the privilege of him speaking to us through this man to tell us that we should not jack off onto the floor because some woman might come by and scoop it into her vagina and create babies. That's just one. That's one of many, many strange and disturbing stories that I heard during my time in the cult Sovereign Church of Elohim International. Now, this Smoke Jackson, he claimed to be a UFC fighter. He claimed to be a mercenary, a murderer. He claimed to be a gangster. And their justification, not just Smoke, but also Kenneth Sr., for why they were who they were over this church of Philadelphia or Laodicea, whatever category you fell into, was not because of their righteousness, but because, quote, we are the worst of the worst, and God chooses the lowest to be the highest, unquote. They justified their positions as kings, apostles, masters, fathers, the ultimate authority in our lives, all of us, because they were, in effect, by their own mouths, the scum of the earth. And they hammered it home in different sermons. They would talk about how no matter how screwed up we might be, no matter how evil we might be, no matter the worst things that we might have ever done, whether it was child molestation or kidnapping or murder, they had done worse than we ever could, and that was why God had placed them in the position that they were in as our authority. Well, maybe that's how God chooses. He chooses the worst of the worst to represent the greatest kingdom on earth. You know, I find that to be a bit of a stretch. A little bit of a stretch. Because they were still the worst of the worst. There was no repentance. They had not changed who they were. Smoke bragged to me about how he had murdered some people in West Africa. Killed them. You didn't hear Paul talk about that, did you? John? Luke? Because maybe they were the worst of the worst in their time prior. But when they accepted Christ, there was a certain amount of repentance, which is turning away, facing the opposite direction, and walking away from those things. Not embracing them, not bragging about them. But that is the way of Sovereign Church of Elohim International. That is their way. They still entertain mercenaries, brag about it. They go deal with all these militant groups overseas. They try to teach us, while I was there, in their security programs, how to kill people. The best way to kill people. My last experience with SCEI-1BLOOD International occurred in 2010 or early 2011. I don't recall exactly. I had been somewhat kicked out of the church because I fell in love with a woman that was not acceptable. And despite my suspension from the church because of my many talents in projecting their image, was invited to go to Canada on a diplomatic mission. While I was in Canada on this diplomatic mission, which was to essentially meet with a bunch of people, big business guys, to secure these economic treaties with the government of the Gambia and President Yahya Jammeh, there came this conflict about some equipment that had been shipped by these guys that we were meeting with in Canada. They were salvagers. They requisitioned equipment and shipped it out. You know, they sold it. And apparently, sometime in the past, Kenneth Jackson had made an order for a certain amount of equipment for use in West Africa, for digging up gold or diamonds or whatever it was they were doing at the time. They had gone through a middleman, an African within their organization, and according to Kenneth Jackson, this person had stolen the equipment. He had ordered it, yet it had never arrived. And he sold this story to the guy up there named Bill Van Ravensway, who ran this salvage company in Canada. It was Toronto. And he had decided, Kenneth Jackson had decided, that this guy had to pay for his crime. So he set up an elaborate scheme to lure this guy into Canada, this middleman, this guy who worked for him, to lure him into Canada, to get him to come to this meeting in this office of Bill Van Ravensway, and there to beat him up, and then have him murdered by these guys that he claimed to be in the mob, the mafia. I don't know what the mafia in Canada is. They were Italians. And we had to go through rehearsals. I was a cameraman at the time, posing as a security officer, or a security officer posing as a cameraman. And we went through several rehearsals of how the man was going to walk in the room, how AP was going to punch him in the face, knock him out, beat him up, then how he was going to question him, interrogate him, and then hand him over to this Italian guy who was going to take him out somewhere and kill him and dispose of the body. No lie. This is my last dealing with the Sovereign Church of Elohim International, One Blood. But it is also the truth. Kenneth D. Jackson Sr. and Smoke Jackson Jr., if they are not murderers through having carried it out, they are certainly guilty of desiring it in their hearts and planning it meticulously. And I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I listened to them talk about this man, this apostle of God, sit there and talk about the murder of one of his followers. Why? I'll tell you why I think. Because I know Kenneth Jackson Sr. and Smoke. Kenneth ripped off Bill Van Ravensway, and he scapegoated this other guy and was going to have him take the fall. Now, Bill Van Ravensway brought me a tape. Well, not Bill Van Ravensway, the Italian. brought me a DVD while we were in Canada, relating to this situation. And he gave it to me. He didn't give it to anyone else. He brought it in confidence to me. And he said, I want you to look at this and tell me what you think. So I took the DVD, took it into my room, popped it into my computer, and watched it. And what it showed in the beginning was these militant-looking Africans wearing their get-up and, having their canes and whatever else. And they were talking in a language I couldn't understand. But they were clearly, the dictator, perfect dictator, stereotype, the African dictators. They were clearly some sort of top guys driving around. I heard him mention 1BLOOD a few times. And then the video clips off, and then it suddenly picks up on this river in Africa. And in this river, this muddy river, there's this structure in the middle of the river, and they have these slaves, what it looks like. It looked to be slaves, black guys. They had hoses, water hoses, coming out of their mouths, and they were diving down deep into the river, underwater, and they were bringing up piles of dirt for gold or diamonds. And there were other guys around with weapons, and it was the equipment that had been stolen. Now, what does it all mean? Well, could be a number of interpretations, I guess. What it means to me, knowing these people, Kenneth D. Jackson Sr. stole from Bill Van Ravensway in Canada. Took the equipment, used it to force people to mine gold, and then falsely accused this other guy as a scapegoat to take the fall for the crime, and then plotted his murder. He stole from me. He stole over $50,000 from me. Personally. A member of his cult stole easily another $50,000 from me. They stole my safes. They stole my father's safes. They stole our gold, our silver. Then they tortured him. His name was Robert Luce. Google it. Google Robert Luce, L-U-C-E, Twiggs County, Twiggs County. Google it. As my father was leaving for Sabbath at the cult, a man by the name, actually he wasn't the guy. There were four of them there. One was named Gregory King. I can't remember the other two. One was named Dennis Jones, who was a cult member, a member of the Sovereign Church of Elohim International. Took him at gunpoint, led him back into his house, and then tied him up with duct tape on the floor. Took scissors, heated them up on the stove to red hot, and then tortured him. My father. They tortured him with red hot scissors for 30 minutes until he would disclose the location of all of the money that Kenneth D. Jackson knew about and had demanded of my father to be placed on Miracle Manor, the embassy, and that if he did not do so, consequences of the Most High God would fall down upon him. And this was his consequence from a cult member. Was it God? Or was it Kenneth D. Jackson Sr.? It was Kenneth D. Jackson Sr. Now, there's another story that's coming up real soon, and I can't break it right now, although every bone in my body just wants to rejoice and to share it with the world. Although it's a horrific story, disgusting beyond what most people will accept, it will come to light within the next 48 to 72 hours, I believe. And we'll report on it then. But this cult, Sovereign Church of Elohim International, 1BLOOD International, Six Keys Health Ministry, under Kenneth D. Jackson Sr. and his son Smoke Jackson Jr., is a vicious and dark and sick group. Now I'm going to go into more details in future videos, and bear with me, folks. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not very good at just going off the gun like this, as you can see from watching this video. I tend to ramble a little bit, but then at the same time, I don't claim to be a cult leader, and I don't run a cult, so I don't have to be good at it. My goal here, I'm going to try to say this without getting emotional. I was in that place for 5 years. More than 5 years. I learned to love a lot of people there. I called them my family. I trusted them with my life. They were all I had. And I was all they had, I guess. And in the end, it turns out that we were all victims. We weren't just victims of men. We were victims of our own desire to love God, to be better people, to want to put away our evil. Bank robbers, child molesters, you name it, they were there. We went there because we wanted to be better. We didn't want to do that shit anymore. And what happened? Because of our zeal, not for God, but our selfishness, we allowed these people, Kenneth D. Jackson and his son, to proclaim themselves the voice of God, and we placed idols in front of ourselves while they claimed to be all sorts of things. And we worshipped them. And in the end, they came like thieves in the night, and they took all that we had. Those that are still there have nothing. Nothing. They'll claim to have everything in the world. They truly believe they do, because they see wealth and blessings as things that are intangible now, because everything that they had was taken. So they can only be taught to rejoice in their suffering. And that's what they do, is they suffer. And if they have their way, you will suffer too, so that they may live like kings. And that is what they do. I have many more stories. I look forward to being able to tell them. And again, like I said, I'm not the greatest storyteller. I'm not the greatest speaker. But over time, I do plan on sharing more of these videos. I've recorded a number more. I'm just waiting for the time to upload them. And my heart goes out to all of you that are still there. Those of you that have come out, and everyone that has come out of that cult since we put up the site SCEI-1BLOOD.me have come to me. We now have quite a network outside of the cult. There's a huge body of resources and information. And we plan on publishing it and putting it together in such a way that we can have the most effect. And in the meantime, we're waiting for these criminal investigations to reach a point where we can reveal more. But in the meantime, we kind of have our hands tied. I believe that is all for now.